Recording. This is Buzzkill with episode 7, I think, maybe. And today I've got Hunter Willis, who's going to lead a conversation with us about shadow information technology.
Bum, bum, bum. So what do we mean when we say shadow IT? Jay, what do you think we mean when we say shadow IT?
Hardware with black cases. No.
Yeah, that's right.
No,
when it's in the
shadow IT,
closet, there's
it's
no
in
light.
the closet. No one can see it. The lights are off. Shadow IT is a huge traditional problem. Well, it's a huge problem still. Yeah, where because information technology teams are not getting the tools that business needs to get the job done, business is just going to get it done on their own.
Yeah, right. So like that can be like anything from a user just using an application that they're not really supposed to be using, right? For something not necessarily like a cloud application, but like a graphical application or something like this that they bought on their own, not really licensed by the organization. But it could also mean, and typically what we're referring to and what we'll be talking about today is more like SaaS and collaboration applications. Collaboration. Them good old collaboration applications that are not applications that maybe not necessarily, I don't want to say that the organization is unaware of, but that are not maintained and really that IT and the security teams don't really have oversight of, right? And what this can look like is like a user or a group of users collaborating in a cloud platform that's not their platform of record. For instance, if the organization's like official platform for collaboration is Office 365, but maybe a few users prefer using like G Suite or Dropbox to shoot stuff back and forth because they think it's easier, or maybe they want to share stuff externally, and there's controls, right, on that platform of record.
Sure.
But another scenario is, and this is something that we also see, especially in like really big organizations, like whole departments of people using another platform in addition to the platform of record. Like, for instance, like a marketing department that has, more people that are like technically savvy and used to newer technologies, utilizing a chat platform or something different than the organization for all their work. And then they kind of like, obligingly check their email and do some chat stuff on the platform of record, right? So
often it's an organization who simply has a spending account with a cap that's low enough or high enough that they can afford to put their 50, 100 users into this other solution. I remember you and I talked about this at one point when I was at Booz Allen Hamilton, back before social enterprise social networks were a thing, or from a technology perspective. We had 2,000 users utilizing the free version of Socialcast.
Yeah.
Or Yammer. Maybe it was Yammer and Socialcast had less. But these were competing platforms, neither of which were officially sponsored, but both of which were being used by our employees, where we were sharing customer data with nary care for what happened with the data. I mean, that's not entirely true. We cared. We just didn't have any means to control it, right?
Exactly.
So let me ask you, Hunter, when it comes to this, what's the real risk we're talking about? Why do I care about shadow IT?
Well, there's all sorts of things, right? There's, as most organizations are familiar with, there's almost always some kind of, legal requirement to hold on to information for a certain period of time, and then organizations have the desire to delete it once that time is up, usually with like contracts and some legal documents. We're usually talking like 5 to 7 years an organization has to maintain records of some different kinds of transactions and things that may pertain to different legal subjects. But the issue is that if an organization is doing that lifecycle management in their platform of record, and users are collaborating and may have some of that information in a third-party platform or another platform, IT departments and the teams in charge of maintaining those requirements have no idea what's in there, right? And that means from two sides of it, not only could those users be deleting stuff that they're not supposed to be deleting, but they could also be holding on to stuff that could be holding the organization liable that they could have deleted, right? So
I remember my first my first internship. I'm not going to say who it was, although I don't think the company is around in name anymore. But my first internship, about 3 months into the internship, we had an email come out, or we had a verbal instruction come out everything related to this particular customer had to be deleted immediately. And it was kosher. That was the agreement with the former customer. Like, we would delete all of their IP and blah blah blah. But we had a shredding party, but we also had to go through each of our computers. And in a shadow IT environment, you can't be sure your people are deleting that information. I mean, there's always a case that something might slip through if you have, even in a central environment. But if they're off in they're using some wiki installed on a server under a desktop, or they're using a cloud platform that you have no control over, there's no way to even check. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so like so that's just one example, right, of those kinds of things. And then the obvious, right, and the more glaring example is like, you don't know who these people can or will be sharing information with, or who might have access to them. There's no way to access, like, there's no control over network security, no control over audit logs, or any, let alone DLP or any kind of like more detailed control over the content of the information that they have. So there's a lot of different reasons that this can be very, very important for an organization to understand. I'm usually very surprised at how blasé people that I talk to answer questions around shadow IT, because it's seen as such a problem that nobody can ever do anything about it. But there are some strategies that you can take, which is one of the reasons we want to have this conversation today. But again, falls great under that buzzkill category, because people don't even want to start the conversation of tackling it, because it's such a big problem for a lot of large organizations, right?
Yeah, but absolutely.
The beautiful thing about it too is that it really fits in, and the funny thing about this topic is that the problem is caused by people using these other platforms and having data outside of the organizational control. But the root of the problem has nothing to do with software. The root of the problem is almost always that people feel like it's easier to do their own thing than it is to use the system of record, right?
Yeah.
They're either more familiar with it, or it's just they feel like it's easier for them,
Or frankly, and this is where it becomes, so whether they're more familiar with it, you can't fix that. They are familiar with what they're familiar with. You could provide training, but okay, how much can training help them become familiar with something versus being dragged in, kicking and screaming to do it? The thing that is something you can adjust is the feedback loop. If you are deploying software, I know you were getting to the phrase, you didn't say it, change management. If you're deploying software and you don't have a good change management program, or your change management program, I guess this would be a definition of not having a good change management program, doesn't have a good feedback loop for people to say, here's the stuff I'm having problems with. Here's the stuff I wish was worked more efficiently for my mission, my business requirements. If you don't have a way for people to do that, it's easier for them to go spend $1,000 on their credit card and expense it on, hotel fees, to do that rather than deal with your system. So a lot of what we've been talking about in Buzzkill, talking about the need for a change program, a governance program, the need for understanding requirements, it helps to avoid shadow IT.
Right, and that's the first place that you start with this, right? And the way that you have to start with figuring out how to even begin to tackle the problem, right? Got to figure out how big the problem is. Yeah. And if you, especially if you're the IT person, right? But there may be other people listening to this, but if you start this conversation by going around asking people, hey, who uses what and what's that look like? It's really, they're going to feel like it's obvious to that you're in the, your purpose is going to be to try to shut this stuff down. So making friends, talk to them about how they do their work. Don't approach it too much differently than you would just regular conversations about, trying to make things more contextual and more efficient for users, right? But as you have those conversations, just ask them, how are they dealing with X, Y, and Z? See if people are willing to talk about what other platforms that they're using, because you as you more softly gain their trust and you start to learn about the way different parts of your organization and maybe different groups of users in your organization collaborate, you can start to drive this communication of like, okay, number one, you're not just trying to shut their party down, right? That's not what it's about. It's about, listen, we recognize that you're doing this because you don't like the systems that we've got, or they're too hard for you, right? So how can we incentivize that, right? Look at the processes that they're using to do this external collaboration stuff and then look at what you've got and see if there are ways to meet the use cases that they're substituting. Okay, and work with them on it. Be a team in it. Make it a team effort with them to try to get more bang for their buck out of the investment that you have in your software. And then as that goes on, right, not only are you going to make things work more efficiently to begin with by improving your platforms, but you're also going to make friends through that process because they're going to see that you're genuinely trying to solve a problem and not just trying to, again, shut their party down. Because there's probably, the likelihood in most of these situations, a lot of these, there's all sorts of external and when it comes to like social collaboration and like simple collaboration platform, there's tons of like task management and file sharing tools out there, right? And the reason that is because most of those are fairly simple tools compared to the kinds of collaboration platforms that enterprises are using to do their work, right? So the point is you can start to show them how they can do stuff the right way and do more, right? If there are automation tools and other things that you can use to show them how they can scale their work efforts, that's the way to go. Show them what's in it for them to obey your rules, right? And then as that starts to happen, you need to make a plan to be able to migrate any of that data that does need to be kept that they've been using in other platforms into your platform of record, right? And there's a lot of different migration tools out there to do that. And that's probably going to include a little bit of data research and possibly like moving it in and then cleaning it up and keeping it in a secure place until that happens. Or, even if you can do the analysis before it even moves into your platform of record. And then there are ways to, of course, restrict network access via, device management solution. I know, right?
Yeah, you saw my face on that one, right? So let me get this straight. So we're going to spend a bunch of time identifying where there is shadow IT, which is probably something we should talk about a little bit more detailed. Then we're going to spend some time identifying the gaps, hopefully, so that we can transition those individuals into our corporate IT structure, our corporate enterprise stuff. Maybe bring their data over, and then you want to restrict access to it. So you're actually going to start turning firewall settings so they can't access Slack or whatever.
I just kind of started going down the list in my head.
You did,
yeah. Yeah. So the point is that, you don't just like turn this off without telling anybody after it over time, right? The goal is you can have like a soft period and then kind of like a hard end date, right? Tell everybody, listen, we're going to start migrating content here. And then by this date, we're asking everybody to be using the platform of record because we're going to restrict access at an eventual time. And you don't, time frame for a large enterprise is probably, for all of this, is probably going to be somewhere from 6 months to 2 years even, right? Like,
okay,
could be like 6 to 18 months. Think of it as like because it is literally a large data migration project from the way that you approach it, right? You're talking to end users about their utilization. You're moving data, you're moving content into a platform from other platforms, and you got to figure out and analyze it before that happens, right? Sure. In essence, it's a migration project, but instead of shutting off a server when you're done, what you're doing is you're restricting that access. But again, you need to make sure that people are on board, that there's an understanding that this is going to happen first, and that, you may even want to give an option for people to extend it a little bit if they're having trouble, right? If you can do this. Now, again, we understand this is not happening in a vacuum. I'm not sitting here saying, listen, drop everything else that you're doing, right? Then that's one of the reasons that why, number one, it can take so long. And number two, I'm not being like, it's going to be 6 months. No, it's going to be somewhere between like 6 months and 2 years. It's a very wide range of time that we see projects like this happening over because it takes a long time amongst everything else that you got going on to communicate with users and to make these things happen. And go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask, so is combating shadow IT part of the cost of business? Like,
Absolutely.
Do you need to have somebody who on a regular basis evaluates if there is a shadow IT problem?
Yeah, it's absolutely not a and I'll dive into how you can do this a little bit and as we move forward here, but it's absolutely not just like a one-time project. Now, depending on how much control you're able to get eventually into over end user devices and things like this, you can lock it down to a certain extent, but it's never going to be 100% because there's always going to be people that go onto a different computer or mobile device and they start just kind of doing what they want to, right? but you can get very far with it. And the more that you get people on board and get people to understand the reasoning behind why this is happening, and combining that with the easier that you can make them, make it possible for them to do the right thing the way that you would like them to do it, the fewer people that you're going to have using shadow IT platforms and external platforms. Now, I'm from the standpoint here, this topic is shadow IT, okay?
Right.
And we're talking about how we reduce it. I'm not saying that you should only have one platform of record that's official for the organization, right? As you're doing this research, you may see somebody using a different platform, and it may come up, okay, this department's using it. Well, they really need it. We don't have anything that can replace what they're doing as an essential business function. And so now we're going to have to maybe see if there's some kind of integration between what they're using, the platform of record, and then see if there's some way that we can learn, the security controls over that, right? But typically it's more efficient to have one platform of record, because if you start diversifying the main platforms that people are using for collaboration, guess what? Now you got to have experts on that platform, your platform, this other platform. You're probably going to either have to have some people take some training classes, or even hire some new folks, and potentially even a department of folks, depending on how many people are using it, right? So there's a lot of potential of cost saving and efficiency that can come from this consolidation and restriction, versus just letting every department do whatever they want to on different platforms and learning all that stuff. And not even to mention the licenses involved with that to use things legitimately.
So when it comes to shadow IT, we talked about risk, right? There's a risk to your data being spilled, to being lost, to being shared inappropriately. There's also maybe risk is the wrong word, but there's a cost factor in shadow IT. I love talking about this one because, people who question if they really need to be worried about it. Oh, my people know not to share sensitive data, in these networks. That's fine. Okay, let's say you trust your people implicitly. That's weird, but I like it. More specifically, how many of your departments have a spending cap of $3,000 on their corporate credit card? And how many of them are investing that in these shadow IT solutions? When I was a consultant, when I first came into consulting in the federal government space, it's about a decade back, we literally had servers underneath desktops with wiki software where we documented processes. So there was the investment of a server, there was the investment of the license for the operating system and the license for the database and the license for the wiki software. And the next thing you know, there's $3,000 plus any kind of annual maintenance. So let's talk about the money factor, right? So now we've got all of these departments with their own servers doing their own things, where that cost could be centralized within our enterprise systems.
Yeah, exactly. Those kinds of, and again, having those conversations with people and having relationships are the only way you're going to find that information out, because it's very difficult to force people to tell you exactly what they're doing, especially if they already know they're kind of in a gray zone. They're not going to just be like, yeah, we bought all these servers for our department. They're not going to do that.
Yeah.
I think that another thing I wanted to talk about a little bit was that there are a lot of ways to, besides talking to people, you can comb through network logs to see, if you're on a VPN or you're doing device management from a centralized platform, you can see, you can comb through network logs to see who's been accessing, URLs for different collaboration platforms that are out there, or things like that, to kind of investigate. You can search and filter those logs to find out who's been browsing what.
Okay.
And then, you can also restrict those kinds of URLs, again, from users. So there are some tools, different device management platforms and network management platforms can, have varying levels of restrictions on there. And depending on how great your network people are, they can do different things as well to restrict those kinds of things. But again, you're never going to be able to stop it dead in its tracks 100%, because there's always a risk that somebody could go onto their own device and share information. There's always the ability to download a document, share it out, just about, right? So I wanted to talk about, you know what? I was trying to think of this earlier. I couldn't remember the example, but so ducks Duck Sai with AvePoint was working with a customer at one point, and he was having a conversation with their leadership, and they were insisting that nobody in their organization is using Shadow IT. And it was like, well, I know a group of users and people that we were talking to use Facebook Messenger, and they were like, no, that's not happening. And he's like, I know, because I'm in the
here's the
I'm
group
in the
I'm
chat.
in.
Here's the group we talked about this this thing. So he uses that as it's a great example,
Yep.
So it's not always just these professional platforms too, right? It could also be like something as simple as like Facebook or Twitter, So, but again, the main driving point here is that people are very rarely doing this maliciously. They're not always just saying this, hey, you know what? I'm just gonna do whatever I want to, and everybody else can just go jump off a bridge. It's almost they're usually hey. So I mean, you hear people say it. Some users do get really frustrated with official systems, but if you look at polling data and research data that's done into like change management and for adoption of software, you have like a very small number of them are early adopters, and then you have this giant wave of like people that are, they kind of like adopting software, but it's a little bit hard to get them to go along with it. And then, it moves on, it goes up the peak and then comes back down. And then I should have a chart to show with this.
I mean, we could always put it in post-process, I suppose.
I mean, it's like it goes. It's roughly about 5% of people are early adopters. They're just going to jump on. They want to know what it is. They want to learn how to use it. They want to get going with it. And then you've got this like 30% of people that are like, okay, we'll use it, but they're a little bit more grudging. And then you've got another 30% of people that don't want to use it and are a little bit resisting, but they will adopt eventually because they just kind of go with the flow. And then that last segment of people are the people that are like really, really diehard about their existing processes. So that's, the last like 20 to 30% of folks in a lot of organizations, they just want to do their thing. They don't like change. And these are the people that you really, as, IT departments, they really have to focus on this last group, because everybody else, it's much easier to get them to buy into why things benefit them, why things benefit the organization. They're more willing to listen to like a contextual story. Here, maybe they're the people that are going to be responsive to a pizza party, for instance, or like a real soft incentive that you can develop relationships with. But that last 20% of people are people that are really going to need, again, still using the carrot, not the stick here, but like a little bit more attention, a little bit more explaining, maybe have power users actively working with these people within their departments to kind of get them on board and try to make things easier with them. And a lot of times, again, these are the people that you might see using Shadow IT that are like not necessarily aggressively trying to do what they want to or trying to break rules, but they don't like the change. They don't want to do things different than the way that they're used to, and they don't see the benefit of doing it your way, right?
That's fair. I mean, there's always going to be somebody, right? But when it comes to okay, so let me ask you this. I'm going to kind of change gears here. So you wrote an article on this on CMS Wire, which is a great article. It lists the seven steps to combating Shadow IT. And the funny part is I didn't realize you actually had a section called what was it? The one that I brought up really early. Set number 4, offer a feedback channel. I didn't even realize that. When I read it before, I missed that completely. So I started talking about it much earlier in the process. But one thing I noticed that there was a related article on CMS Wire called "Shadow IT Isn't Going Away, and That's a Good Thing." And it takes a different stance on what we're talking about. It actually states that Shadow IT doesn't necessarily cost organizations extra money. It takes a different stance on SLAs that organizations provide with their enterprise software. The one thing I definitely completely agree on is it illuminates governance needs, right? One of the big reasons people take the route of Shadow IT is because they can't govern what they need within your constraints, so they just go do their own thing. When it comes down to it, to you, is Shadow IT completely negative? Is there a light in the shadow, so to speak, worth talking about?
Well, and I think that goes back again to what is shadow, like, so when we look at the definition of what Shadow IT is, right, we're calling it things that central IT doesn't really have control over, right?
Right.
And there is this like democratization of IT that's happening right now in our culture and across the world, especially as cloud platforms become more easy to use. In and of itself, that concept is great. It's great for people to have the freedom to do the things they want to do, need to do, etc. But there is a I'm trying to remember this guy's name. There's a great book called Loon Shots, and I can't remember the author's name, but it's a fantastic book. I definitely recommend it. Safi Bachel, I think, is the guy's name. I may have just messed up his name. Anyway, the premise is that there are people in organizations that are supposed to increase risk, to like find new things and need to be let to do that, and then there are people in organizations that need to reduce risk, right,
Okay.
to maintain control. And IT, their job is to reduce risk. A lot of their job is to reduce risk, and there's a lot of ways they can do that and still increase productivity, but organizations have an obligation to their customers and to the government to maintain, certain rules and to obey rules. And they can't do that. They can't do that if their users are just allowed to do whatever they can do. Now, so there is the situation, though, like we talked about, where users may find a way that's more productive to do something that the organization is unaware of. And then, like I said, they may find that out and then determine that that should become part of an authorized platform that the organization can use, and then bring that into the organization. And it's seldom more efficient to do that on the whole, but it's possible. But when that happens, it's inherently no longer shadow IT, right? Because the organization has visibility into what's going on with it. So I do agree with that using one platform of record may not be the most efficient way to do things for every organization. And I also agree with the statement that, overall, the democratization of IT, right, and the freedom of IT and people being able to do what they need to do in easy ways is good. But I think that for organizations, both for reducing risk and operating efficiently, I think it's very important to consolidate your collaboration platforms of record as much as you possibly can to make it easier for people to learn how to do their jobs, to make it easier for IT teams to maintain those platforms, and also to basically simplify interdepartmental processes for everybody. Because if we've got people, not even using the same application to generate, collaborate, do stuff, right, you can get very mangled very, very quickly. So there's I don't want to say necessarily that, again, it's inherently bad to have many of these different kinds of platforms going on, but it can make things much more difficult, and I see more negatives than positives.
Yeah. So it's really, I don't know. I don't know if my microphone is picking up my ticky-tacky of my very mechanical keyboard or not.
It's a little bit, but it's not bad.
But one of the things that I took away from what you said was that we have an obligation to our customers, and I paraphrase as the regulatory bodies that oversee our data, to safely maintain and secure that information, whether it's our customer data, whether it is employee data, whether it is citizens data. If you're a government agency, you have a responsibility to utilize it safely, and you can't ensure that in a shadow IT based environment. So I like that balance of balancing the safety of the data within those systems, but allowing people to do what they need to do to be successful. So it makes me wonder if shadow IT as a term maybe has such a negative connotation. Maybe it's worth internally just hold that thought. It's almost worth having a way for people to report the systems they're using outside of your enterprise solutions, so that you can work with them to come up with solutions to protect their data, whether it is migrating them in or finding ways to protect their data where it is. Thoughts?
Yeah, if there's a thesis to all of this, and what I want to say as a wrap up here, right? That is it. That's hitting the nail on the head. no more shadow IT. You're doing the wrong thing. Here are the rules, and we're cutting it off. Like that's a very traditional. That's the way we used to deal with this stuff,
Right,
right?
right, right.
Can't be like that anymore. It's like, hey guys, we know you like using G Suite, but we use Dropbox or Office 365, and we need to work together to figure out how we can get everybody into one platform because it's the only platform that meets our needs from, legal standpoint and all of the
Right.
security things that we have to make happen. So we're not going to turn it off. We're not going to, chop anybody's heads off, but you have 6 months before we
But you have
do it,
6
and
months
we got to
before
work
goodbye.
together. Yeah, exactly. Like we'll work together and make it happen. It, I'm not suggesting that you go in there and just turn it off, because the phrase I always use for this is pitchforks and torches. They're going to
Yeah.
storm your IT castle and heads are going to roll, and
Yeah.
nobody wants that, right? Especially not you. So, so be nice about it and come up with a plan and make some friends and figure it out, right? It doesn't have to be like this horrible. And you can even come in there like and just, just one way to approach it in my mind, if I was doing this directly, would just be like, hey, I just realized we did this and I want people to be able to use it, but we can't right now from where we are legally as an organization, and I got to solve this problem. Can you help me? Like,
Yeah.
that's a really different approach than like, you are unauthorized, we're turning it off.
There's a whole AvePoint has a tangential solution that I think would be interesting to explore on this. So forgive me for making this about AvePoint. It's just where my knowledge factory is on this one. We have a solution that helps privacy offices identify what data is expected to be in what systems of record in the organization, right? Our privacy impact assessment capabilities. And it makes me wonder if, because I was thinking about this whole conversation. I'm like, we need a shadow IT czar who's going to chase this all down and fix the problems. And I'm like, no, maybe actually the better solution is to invest in that privacy impact type capability, the privacy office, to help understand really like, okay, we know what we're supposed to have. What do we actually have? And utilize that as the first feedback loop for working with people who aren't using your enterprise solutions to figure out why and how to solve that problem. That's really interesting.
The why is the big thing. I'm glad I thought of it, Jay.
I'm glad you thought of it also.
Just kidding. No, it is. It's a really good thought. That's a really good thought. No, absolutely. There definitely needs, and this goes back into your feedback loop and having an adoption community for software that's working with IT to constantly figure out problems, and understand what's going on. Because at the end of the day, what you're doing is, with what you suggested, right? You're pulling this information in from the organization. You need to have the call and response going on to be able to get that information and correlate it with the analysis that you can bring up, right? Yeah, so, it's really good. So, again, it all ties back into this change management. Where do I get started with these big problems nobody likes to talk about? If you are in IT and you're having problems talking with stakeholders about it, coming up with an outline and kind of making them understand why this is important and why it can take so long and these kinds of things. Come up with some real examples, get some feedback from users, and like show people what they're saying about this problem, right? Things like this, so that the organization can understand. Because solving these problems at the end of the day means more productivity for the organization, which is what everybody wants, right?
Yep. Yeah, this is really cool. This was a fun conversation, Hunter. I missed having guests, but it was nice to kind of just bounce back and forth on this. So, we've got a few articles we'll post on the blog. Hunter 7 strategies to stop shadow IT. Is shadow IT shadow IT isn't going away article that I pulled up from there. And also, I'll see if I can find a good article on the privacy angle of things.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm not trying to sell the AvePoint stuff. It's just where my knowledge was from. So I'll see what I can find about how to inventory your data how to inventory your network from a data perspective, and what to do with that. Oh, that was good.
That'd be really helpful. Don't forget to post in your comments what you thought about this episode. If you have any suggestions for other episodes, tell us what you
in
thought.
your comments.
And tell us if you're right or wrong, right? So, no,
tell us if you're right or wrong.
Tell us if you think we're right or wrong, right? Like, if you think we're wrong, don't be afraid to let us know, or if there's something that you agree with, or if you have any specific examples or other strategies, other techniques that you use to solve this kind of problem, that would be fantastic too.
I would absolutely love to bring someone on in the next few weeks to talk about their shadow IT story. You know, how did they identify it? How did they combat it or accept it into their program? And what are they doing today? That'd be great.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So click here.
Jay. Yeah.
For the latest episode of This Week in Teams, and subscribe over there. And otherwise, man, have a good weekend.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for listening, and thanks again for the conversation, Jay.
Take care.